Hello, Gophers! I'm St-Pierre, and you're listening to Go Podcast. Today, I'm joined by Ivan Fetch, and we talk about what it is like to be a blind person in tech. Yeah, it will be a special episode, for me at least, being a blind user using a screen reader and things like that. This will be split into two parts because yes, we have a lot to cover, and I think we deserve two episodes. Just a quick reminder that the Slack channel is still there. Go Podcast in one word in the Gophers Slack community. So if you are there, I would appreciate if you can join. And on that, this is my interview with Ivan. Hello, Gophers. So today I'm joined by Ivan Fetch. Thank you very much, Ivan, for joining me today.
Absolutely. Thanks for the invite. It's great to get to chat with you.
Yeah, we will have a super interesting talk today, especially since I started this podcast. Every time that I'm telling a guest that I am a blind person, that I'm using a screen reader, the reaction is always the same. Wow, I want to hear about that. I want to know more and things like that. And I known you from the Bitfield Slack community. From John Arundel. So I thought, what could be interesting to invite Ivan. So let's start by. As we always do in here, I ask my guests to introduce themselves. So anything that you want to say to the listeners, we will have a conversation about being blind, being programmers, and doing a lot of interesting and challenging stuff. So anything that you want to say to us, we will start from there.
Sure, I'll give kind of a high level, and we can dig into any number of things that you like. As Dominic said, my name is Ivan. I happen to be completely blind, basically since birth. I was born prematurely, and as a result of some complications, I've never had sight. So that's a bit relevant because I didn't lose my sight later in life, although I'm as familiar as one can be through dialogue with friends and work that I used to do training folks who had lost their sight later in life in how to use various technology. So I've always been blind, and I've worked in technology basically my whole life as what I describe now as infrastructure, engineering, and also, of course, Go software development. So I happen to be a musician. I love music. I've played keyboard for almost my entire life, and semi-recently I've taken up bass guitar. I spent a year horseback riding every week for a new, different, fun thing to do as a way to get outside. And I once did a demo flight to fly a helicopter, of course, with a co-pilot, being the responsible person in the aircraft, because I have always been fascinated by how helicopters work and would listen to YouTube videos of folks doing, startup and shutdown procedures, etc. And so that was something that I was excited to get to do a few years ago. And for about six or so years, not too long ago, my wife and I lived kind of a nomad life where we worked remotely and got to visit various places in the US and Canada. So there's some random sort of highlights, if you will, and happy to talk more about any of those things, or we can talk career stuff or whatnot, but that's me.
Yeah, that's very, very interesting. I think we will have a lot to unpack. There's a lot of things that I didn't know from you, so it will be interesting. So let's start by maybe why choosing a career in tech, for example. So let's return. So I'm legally blind from birth. I have retinitis pigmentosa, which is a degenerative disease that, inevitably drive to probably no sight at all, or, not enough to read anymore. And this is my state at the moment. But it's different. I mean, why have you chosen tech at some point. So I imagine that you had some option ahead of you, and was that difficult to decide to what you wanted to do for your entire career?
It didn't feel terribly difficult. A lot of this is, how how we were raised as children, and what support we had from our parents, and who they were, and so on. And so, but when I was a little kid, I had some kind of aptitude for understanding things, how things worked, natural curiosity for those kinds of things, solving problems, and also for explaining things to other people. I also had some aptitude for music, so I started playing piano around the age of 4 years old. My dad had got my mother a piano, and I was just playing around with it. And rather than banging on it as a stereotypical kid might, I was playing individual notes, listening and observing, and like trying to figure it out in some way as it's explained to me. And so I started piano lessons. And so as I grew up and went through school and all that normal stuff, I seemed to have these two possible paths of things that I had some kind of ability. And they were pretty equally interesting to me. And to be brutally honest and capitalistic, I chose technology because everyone said, well, you'll make easier money doing that. And I also had a sense, as I continued to assess this decision on my own as a young adult, that my enjoyment for music could be ruined by me making it something that kept the lights on. So essentially, that's my not too fascinating process into deciding what would I do for my career. I was always, like I said, learning how things worked, technical or not. Interested in the sounds that things make. When I was a young child, somebody would be mowing the lawn, and I would hear how a lawnmower would do something different than other lawnmowers, and I would want to figure out, what's up with that? How come it does that? I would ask all kinds of questions of people that could see, what is this doing? It makes this noise when the guy does such and such a thing. What's different? And some people are very observant, and some people aren't. And I would stumble onto somebody in my family or a friend who was particularly observant, and they would maybe pick up on, when they let go of this bar, the blade disengages, but the motor continues to run, for example, which was a difference in sound that I had picked out. So I was always curious, and I would start showing people how to do things, solving technical problems, like we all do as technicians, right? You become your family's kind of like technical support on some level, right? And so that continued, and I would do work with, when I was going to high school, we had an adult education group where seniors would come and learn things in the classroom after hours, and a lot of them had computer problems, and I would help them over the phone. And sometimes I didn't know at all what I was doing, and I would figure it out with them because I had enough of an aptitude, and they mostly didn't mind that, and we would get things done. So things progressed, and I became, what back in the 1990s was just called sysadmin or systems admin, and running Linux servers and computer labs and all the normal kind of things. I think that's common for folks in this trade. And before long, they started renaming things, and applications became distributed, and software fanned out across servers and containers, and now I'm an SRE, and so on and so forth. But it started as a classic sysadmin. So
Nice.
So I think it was handy, as I sort of babble back to the core question and the core point. I think it was handy that I had one aptitude that translated into a pretty decent career trajectory, and of course, income you can't shake a stick at generally, right? I feel lucky about that.
Pretty interesting. What was your setup like at that moment when you started? So I'm talking about So let's introduce some concept to the listeners that might not be familiar. So I would imagine that you have learned Braille fairly early, and
I did, yeah.
I would also imagine that when you started to play with computer, you had a Braille display device attached to your computer, replacing a screen, right?
I happened to not have a Braille display. I'm not entirely sure why. I think in part because they were so expensive. Everything. I was. I'm in my late 40s, so I was born in the late 70s, early 80s, and so back then, anything that was going to be assistive technology for somebody that was visually impaired was a very specialized device. And I say it that way because today, for example, our computers can make sounds, any kind of sound, playing a song or making a beep, just natively. There's audio built into the computer. But if you go back in time, you had to install a sound card in a computer for it to be able to make a noise, any kind of noise. But it still couldn't make noises in the right way to become synthesized speech. So I didn't have a Braille display. I did read Braille, and I used it for a lot of my coursework going, through, preschool, kindergarten, all the way through, in K through 12, as we call it. But as my years increased, I used Braille less and less. So it was a function of what format or my materials I needed available. So in the early years, that was Braille. And so I learned Braille, and it's an important thing to have. And I don't know if it's feels as necessary now, to be honest, right? I'm sure there's some diehard Braille zealots that are like rolling over, but what I had eventually was a piece of hardware called an Echo PC, and it was a card that would go into the Apple II line of computers. So this isn't like Apple Macintosh, but Apple, that ran BASIC as an operating system, and it was a card that could basically be sent commands in software, and it would make very robotic sounding, especially to today's ears, speech. And so eventually, I was probably around 7 years old or so when this was something that I was able to have in my life. Not without some dollars, right? These things, I can't remember exactly, but they were expensive. I'm going to say like $1,000 plus or something. I don't know. To back then to get one of these devices, and you had to have specialized software. So you didn't have a screen reader as we think of it today on a operating system or as a third-party piece of software. You would have specialized software written, and I won't go into tons of detail necessarily, but to suffice to say that I had a word processor called Braille Edit initially, and then something newer later on called BEX, B-E-X, that was written to interface with this speech card. And then there was also a thing you could run to get a little bit of a speech in the basic command line prompt. And so, I could run basic programs and get essentially what amounted to terminal output. And so that was my computer for quite a few years until I eventually switched to IBM PC with DOS, and still specialized hardware for speech, but now we had the notion of a screen reader, and so you could use other software that wasn't necessarily written to be accessible, but it happened to be, and you were happy about that. And so now I can use like WordPerfect 5.1 as my thing to do schoolwork, et cetera, and then Windows, screen readers, and then eventually Mac for me. For those who don't know, Apple for a while now has embedded a screen reader into both their Apple Mac operating systems and their iOS for iPhones and iPads, etc. And so I switched, I don't know, maybe in 2011 to Mac.
That that is very very interesting. So I was not aware of those devices, and being someone that attended a blind, school for blind since the fifth grade. Very very early, they gave us like 8086 Texas Instrument, like laptop
Yeah,
computers,
right.
but everyone had the people that were reading Braille were having a Braille device attached under the laptop. So it was like velcroed. I don't know how to say that in English, but basically,
Oh, yeah.
it was like jammed
recall.
with the laptop. So
Yep,
they
yep.
were reading that.
Yeah. There was all sorts of sort of, cobbled together sort of specialized hardware combos, that I recall that were like that, where different shops and groups. I remember someone that's kind of local to me here, at least used to make a laptop that like didn't have a proper screen anymore, geared for blind users. And this was already in the day when screen readers were a lot easier to come by as software and so on and so forth. But yeah, there's always been a business for this more specialized hardware, but it's always been relatively expensive. And I'm really thankful that growing up in a time when books were Braille or they were on tape, but it was a slower speed that you had to play the tape, and also it was a 4-track tape recorder,
Yep.
which they used the left and right stereo channels as a split to like get tons more audio on tapes and so on and so forth. Like that was the only way you could really attain reading material, textbooks for school or otherwise. And today I can get a book. I can go to bookshare.org and get something, or I can get it through other mainstream sources, whether I want it in text or whether I want to go to Audible or something and get an audiobook. And it's just a night and day, huge difference in the ability to get things and compared to before. So, on some level, I'm happy I grew up with a different perspective. I think the perspectives we gain are valuable. But I also sometimes think about how would it have been if I had grown up as a kid with, an iPhone or something. So it's wild.
Oh yeah. Yeah, totally. It's very funny that you mentioned this recorder. So again, from my side, it was pretty different because like I was saying, I basically attended regular school until fifth grade, and at some point I was starting to have difficulties. And I don't want to enter into any politics, but in Canada we were lucky to have the government chip in for everything that you were going to need. So not only we had a school for blind in Quebec, but once you entered there, they gave you this General Electric 4-track recorder and a laptop a little later. At first, it was a typewriter, basically.
Yep.
Those. So it was pretty dramatic for me because at some point I was not being able to see the board in regular school, and I was starting to have some difficulties. I was aware that I was having. I was legally blind since birth, but to be frank, I was having from my point of view, a great vision when I was young. When I entered into that school, my teacher was completely blind. I was not someone that I was not knowing Braille at all, and we were a couple of students that were still seeing to write, with a pen on paper. And she had this device that she was moving on our paper sheet, and she was reading. It was like optically converting what was written on the paper from a relief point of view for her using a finger. So it was not converting that into Braille, but it was. I don't even know what it was called, but when I saw that the first time... I
imagine it might have been called the Opticon. There was a bunch of potential other devices that could have done the same thing, but I remember seeing this as a 10-year-old or something, and you would stick your finger like in this hole that didn't give you a whole lot of wiggle room, and then you would feel a raised line or whatever of like you say, in relief. And I didn't know print, and so this wasn't helpful to me. But it was a really cool.
But it's just to say that from exactly. I was also around 10 years old, and from a 10 years old point of view at that time, I was like completely blown away. And this is where accessibility started for me. But unfortunately, I never learned Braille at that moment. So let's return a little bit to any challenges that you face, because from what I understand at the moment, you were always going towards servers and whatnot. So I must assume a lot of terminal work and things like that. So I would guess that your device was kind of able to read the terminal like easily. Were you able? Because if I recall, I was also in the MS-DOS era, and sometimes there were some commands that was outputting so many line at you. So how would you do that at that time? Was it able to return back into history and reread line by line what went wrong or something like that?
So when I first started touching Linux boxes, there are screen readers for Linux, and there have been for quite some time in both GUI screen readers for X Windows, and also just what they call console-based, which is sort of the terminal you'll get even if you have a Linux box that doesn't have any graphical user interface. And so, but I never really, I never wanted to add switching screen reader muscle memory. So the keyboard commands that you get used to using to hear auditory feedback about what's the line above the line I'm on, or to review the screen. And for years they've called this sort of alternate cursor the review cursor, right? Mm-hmm. The ability to look around on the screen without moving the physical cursor that everyone associates with where I'm about to type letters. There's also a review cursor. So I for one didn't want to add, I want to play with Linux and learn Linux and see what happens with that stuff. I didn't want to add and learn a new screen reader on top of that. And also, when I had read accounts of screen readers for Linux, no offense intended at all to the amazing people who have made and continue to make the screen readers. I found it sort of a challenging thing that I could always avoid. And the other accounts from people that I knew who had used Linux screen readers back in the day were that, here's all these challenges, there's all these things that don't work. And so I wanted to use my native DOS computer, and so that's what I did. And I connected it over serial cable with a null modem adapter to a serial port of this other computer that I had Linux on, and that's how I would get into the Linux box. And so to get more to your question of the kind of interaction experience, there was a review cursor even then, and I think I used like Procom or something, because there's no terminal emulator built into like DOS, and so I was able to page up and look at previous stuff. I would pipe things into a pager as much as I could so that I wouldn't have to scroll a lot. I would just read and then hit spacebar and advance. I also, something that people wonder about a lot, I don't tend to run a command and then let it just vomit into my ears all of the output. I usually know what I'm looking for, and so I might run a command and then press Control to silence my speech, and then review, move up a few lines and look for the things that I want. I also got really good at piping commands into cut and awk and sed and chopping up the output text or using output modifiers for the command that I was running to limit the output to the thing that I knew that I wanted to see. And that's once you've been using some kind of Unix for a while and you know what you want, right? I'm not going to look at the output of the PS command and read across all of the columns where you're kind of having to remember, like, okay, the fourth column is the thing I care about. The fourth column, you know, and then you're kind of ignoring like the first few words, and there it is. There's the fourth column. That's the thing I wanted to know. So you do get good at picking those kinds of things out. It's a little bit analogous to how people can look at a noisy wall of content and pick out the two things they need. You do get good at that auditorily, but also you get good at picking out the things you want.
Yep.
So yeah.
Oh yeah, the good old commands. I'm very impressed myself when we have talked a little bit earlier, and let's enter this text editor land. You are using Vim, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
Yeah, this is great. I was using Arch Linux at some point and was using Vim. When I started to use a screen reader, I was lost, to be frank. And I'm still to this day, I retried Vim the other day, and I cannot understand how you are doing that, because to me it feels I don't know, it feels extremely difficult to be in those two modes at some point, and now the screen reader is having difficulties. It's certainly a user issue. I'm not good at doing that at the moment, but it's very impressive that you are using that. Were you at all? Have you tested at some point Emacs with Emacs Speak?
I played with it some. I used it for 6 months in some capacity, not exclusively. Emacs and Emacs Speak always felt like if you wanted it to, it could try to be like a complete operating environment. Like you could just live in Emacs and do everything, and there was like a ability to read your email and to look at the web and all these things that were very cool. But again, even if that probably could have served me fine, I was also very stubborn and wanted to use the mainstream or the typical tools.
Right.
And that doesn't mean that people don't use Emacs as their typical tool to do things in the way that I just described, because of course a ton of people did back then, and I'm sure do now. But I just could never really embrace it personally. So I did play with Emacs Speak some, yes. And I did, like on the editor front, I used like Pico, which came with the Pine Mail software, or Nano, which was kind of based on that somehow. So right. Two editors with a very similar UI. I used that for a while in the beginning because it was there was no command mode like you described that Vim and VI have, right? So I used that for a very long time. And to be honest, what motivated me to use VI was I was getting on too many servers for various work things and needed to edit stuff. And VI was always there. Yeah. And so I learned just enough to be able to edit a file and make a couple of changes and not worry about needing to do more. And it was the sort of calm gateway into, oh, look, this isn't so bad. And then I would just keep using it for stuff and then using it on my own computer. And that was kind of the transition for me into Vim. So, and I'll say one quick thing about your sort of challenges to, which mode am I in and all that kind of stuff. From a screen reader perspective, it is kind of weird. There are times when, for example, you're moving up and down in a file with the arrow keys or with J and K, which is my own muscle memory these days. But and the screen reader will miss that you are on the next line. Yeah. And that sounds like a horrible, like stupid thing to put up with in your life when I say it out loud. But I'm so used to it that I kind of look for it automatically. And when I'm arrowing down through some code, just reading it, I will encounter this plenty, and I kind of recognize when it's happened, because I'm like, well, that line I just heard, it's obviously not, that line probably doesn't repeat. And I will sometimes go down, and then I will go, quickly left and right to kind of make it realize that, hey, look, see how the cursor is down here? you want to catch up and realize. So again, I know that me describing doing this automatically as a regular part of my existence feels horrible, and I'm sure it sounds ridiculous. And there are some other ways that you can try to mitigate this. You can tell your screen reader to, I'm sorry, I forget what the setting kind of is called typically, but it essentially is like be slower at assessing where you are when you're in the terminal, and that kind of sentiment. There is a setting for that. I remember this from my Windows days, and there's something I think similar in VoiceOver, and I've used that setting, and it sometimes works, but then there are times that you have to continue to readjust the setting, which is why I've just done this workaround. So this is sometimes better using a native Vim that's not in the terminal. If you want to sort of give yourself a break and try like Vim for Windows instead of running Vim inside of like the terminal. So the advantage there is you're running a native app. How do I say this? The UI is a native UI in your operating system, and even though it's not like necessarily super graphical per se, you get a little bit of a different navigation experience. It's the same editor, it's all the same, command mode versus editing mode, etc. But I have found sometimes that's a better experience for the thing that you described. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah. I'm pretty. Yeah, I'm using Windows basically for NVDA. So let's try to have the listeners catch up a little bit. So what I was trying to convey with my last question is that, well, what I've seen since using a screen reader full time is that, well, I'm sorry, but you are kind of constantly fighting over almost anything that you are trying to do with a computer, and that's just life.
It's very noisy and disruptive when it's new.
Oh yeah, and totally. But even even after 2 years, maybe almost 3. I don't count anymore. But I mean, I don't know. I'm still not. I don't know. It's still difficult at a lot of places.
Yeah.
But yeah. So what I was trying to convey is that for me, so Windows is just a shell where I can have NVDA, which is my screen reader. All of my time is passed on WSL, which is the Windows subsystem for Linux, and I'm using VS Code, which is installed on Windows, and that's it. That's my life basically. I'm always on the command line, but I had a not very good experience. Well, maybe it might be time for me to retry, but Orca is the screen reader on Linux, and yeah, it was very difficult. So maybe it's just me when I learned how to use a screen reader full time. Picking something easier like VoiceOver Mac or NVDA Windows, or maybe JAWS could have been an option. But today, I'm pretty happy with my setup. VS Code is extremely nice in terms of accessibility. They have added a lot of small sounds. They started that almost 2 years ago, and they continue to improve that. That just help. And the integration with the language server is very, very good. So things like when just things like when people are using a mouse to mouse over a function, for example, and now you can see the function documentation and things like that. You can do all of this with keyboard commands now, and yes, this starts to be very difficult to not use that, if I can say that. I'm pretty. I think I'm back where I was productivity wise when I started to use the screen reader, just because the accessibility effort is pretty good in VS Code.
Yeah, and I mean, not that you aren't doing this or aware of it, but give yourself some credit for the amount of work and the iterative process that it is to get to a point where you can say what you've just said, that you feel like your ability and productivity is very close, if not at a place that you were previously, right? Except now you're using speech feedback. That's a huge lift, and it takes time. I remember when I switched to Mac, and you have to do it in pieces. You have to take chunks of your life and do the new thing, and then when you get tired or your day is long or you're doing work that itself is challenging, the overhead, which normally is muscle memory and feels like less effort, the new overhead of I'm using something new to get the feedback to know what I'm doing is not for free. It's considerable. The analog I use sometimes with folks that are sighted is, it would be like if I did something to your monitor so that you noticed it was different. You turned it at an angle, sort of 45 degrees, not completely on its side, but something disruptive where you could still kind of see the reflection of the work you're doing, but it's not your normal monitor. So anyway, congratulations, for lack of some other better term there, on reaching that point, because it's considerable effort. And
oh yeah, totally. And don't get me wrong, it's good on some tools that I've quote unquote mastered, but it's pretty still difficult. Just take some web interface. I mean, Stripe is just it's a great company, but I mean, wow, there's a ton of things that it is not accessible. There's a lot of tools, and this could be our next segment. So how do you deal with new tools? So let's say your company decides to I don't know, to force you on using Slack or Discord or whatever new tools to communicate, and you never really use that. So is it a challenge for you or
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely. So a few things. I when I started a new job, I often will end up having some sort of presentation that I give where I'm showing some degree of how a screen reader does what it does and what it sounds like, and at slowed down speech and the normal rate of speech that I use, and how things kind of look. And I do mean that literally from a screen reader perspective. So at least with VoiceOver on the Mac, there's a caption panel that kind of hovers that, like, I can't see. It doesn't get in my way. I don't hear it at all. But people can see it visually, and it shows what the screen reader is saying. And then they can also see, if you have it enabled, they can see the literal VoiceOver cursor, which is the thing I referred to earlier as kind of the review cursor, the way that I can move around and read the screen without necessarily moving the mouse pointer or the real cursor. So that helps to kind of, show literally what's happening in screen reader land. And I also will show how a web page is considerably more linear. There is no like, oh, the thing you want to click is at the upper left corner of the screen, right? And so, because that's just not how web pages lay out to a screen reader necessarily. So anyhow, I tend to give these sort of demonstrations of sorts and open for questions and so on and so forth. And part of that includes me, being very social about sharing with various folks in the company, that accessibility is a range, and not all software is accessible. Some software appears to be literally an empty window with minimize, maximize, and close buttons at the top and nothing inside of it, depending on the UI framework that it was written in, etc. And so I try to convey how it's very valuable to get to play with new tools when we can, when something is perhaps being assessed. Because mostly onboarding a new tool in a company or in a group starts with some kind of test, with a subset of people. And so I'm lucky if I can get in. I don't mean it doesn't happen often. I mean, I consider myself lucky to be able to typically join those kind of groups. And so that gives me a little bit of an opportunity to experience the tool before it's an emergency of some sort. Like, I have to use this thing and I have no idea what its deal is. Tons of things are perfectly accessible, and it's just getting to know kind of, the obstacles to ignore. And, if it's a web UI, even if it's an application, it maybe has a web view, because it's written to be cross-platform. And so you get to know, I can use heading navigation to hop to the pieces of the UI that I want, or, when I click on something and a new modal dialog pops up, to my perspective, it's at the quote unquote bottom of the view that I'm looking at. And even though it's not visually. And so, okay, I'll go down to the bottom and look at it. So you get to know how these apps work. And like you said, your example about Stripe, apps change. There's things I've used for years that all of a sudden become less and less accessible. I will often open a support ticket with that company, and I'll be honest, I'm not always in the mood to do that. But the only way people will know that things are not working entirely well is for you to tell them. And that doesn't mean that folks always have the time or the budget or whatever to fix accessibility. Sometimes things aren't accessible because some UI framework that was used uses UI controls that are a little bit less standard, and the only real fix is to completely switch frameworks, which frankly a lot of people aren't going to do, or they're going to like defer it to next year's goals, and while I might be sad about that, I also really understand. So in terms of your question, how do I get to know new software? I mean, I've said a lot of words already. I guess that's a good high-level answer, but
I think so.
There's of course, tons of nuance to getting to know the things that we use kind of regularly. And there's always a challenge in terms of a visual user interface is going to use visual cues to call out things that matter. Here's a banner across the top of the screen that's trying to tell you about a thing, and you can dismiss it with this button and whatnot. And that's just not the perspective that we have looking at a user interface. The thing that is front and center visually might not be obvious or front and center from the perspective of looking at something with a screen reader. And so what that means is that your onboarding experience as a user with that tool is almost always going to be different. And sometimes what I'll do is I'll have even a 15-minute call with someone where I'll get on a Zoom, I'll share my screen, and I'll say, I see these and these and these things on this part of the UI, and I know I'm going to have to use this tool in these 3 ways. Let's kind of walk through this. And it's a really good way of fast tracking visual feedback from someone who is just observant or even better knows the tool. And you can help kind of map constructs a lot more quickly. It doesn't mean that we can't figure it out by ourselves, but I like efficiency, so let's fast track that. So that's another method that I'll use, and
that's pretty
it really helps.
Talking about meetings and things like that. So are you doing any kind of collaboration or pair programming, or maybe infrastructure could be just just being with someone else and trying to solve an issue. Let's say a YAML file that is missing some indentation at some point could be pretty hard with the screen reader. So how are you dealing with that aspect?
Yeah, so pair programming you mentioned, I don't tend to do a ton of that. I find it a little bit of a lopsided experience for me. We were speaking about VS Code earlier. I've heard VS Code has a really nice like pair programming kind of facility, and I haven't tried that. VS Code is something I try to use every once in a while, and I need to just dedicate more time to it. And by the way, I've worked a few years ago with the VS Code dev team on maybe 4 or 5 or 6 issues, like how to reflect when something's indented with a tone and some other bugs and that kind of stuff. Even though I don't use it regularly, I used it to help kind of test and validate and explain some of the issues and work with that team from Microsoft. And those folks are amazing at what they do to make the user experience for us. So hats off to you all. I only remember half of your names, and so I'm not going to, but I really am impressed and appreciate you all for what you've done. So, but at any rate, the pair programming stuff is tricky because my experience is that even using something to share, like a terminal session, like Teammate is a good example. It's a kind of a wrapper around the TMUX screen multiplexer, and you can essentially get like a thing that somebody else can SSH into that is like your session, and so then I can run my editor and stuff on my computer, or they can run it on theirs. But we're working in the terminal. We're not working in like a GUI app,
right?
And because I can't see a traditional screen share, right? It's a nothing picture for us, and so. But the problem there is that typically people that are typing or arrowing through a file that have vision are understandably just going to do it really, really fast. They're using their eyes separately to read or scan or skim that text, or they're familiar with it, and I might be familiar with it as well. But me tracking what they're doing, because I have to say, okay, are you done arrowing? And then let me read the line you're on. And my speech is very fast, but it's in some cases it's not as fast as eyes, because they're not reading the whole line, but I am, because I want the context. So, it doesn't mean that the person I'm working with won't help to mitigate those problems, but it's not a very great natural experience. So I have done pair programming this way, and it can work, but it feels a little bit forced. Sometimes the way I'll do those kind of sessions is, if I'm going to drive anyway, I'll just share my screen, and then they can see what I'm doing, and then I'm still kind of driving. Even if they say, oh wait, go up 2 lines and let's, make this into a closure and blah blah blah. It's not exactly pair programming. I might be driving more, and then they might be driving, and I might not be attempting to real time track what they're doing, but we can also use our words, right? So if the person I'm pairing with is saying, okay, I'm going to add a Terraform resource for this thing, and there's this other parameter we can use called blah that does this. This is a great substitute for seeing someone's screen. If they're a good communicator, it goes a long way.
But how do you deal with someone talking and now your screen reader is saying what you are also at and things like that? This to me is where I'm failing at the moment. I just cannot do that anymore. I cannot concentrate on someone speaking and concentrating on what my screen reader is saying.
So it doesn't work all the time. Like if again, keep in mind, if someone's driving, they're typing, they're writing the code, and they're a good communicator about what they're doing. I'm not trying to track. I'm not using my screen reader to follow what they're doing. I'm just listening to them talk as a human.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
However, I do often look at something with a screen reader while someone else is talking, and it doesn't always work. It depends, how hard is the conversation we're having? How hard is the problem we're solving? Does the person I'm working with communicate succinctly and well and clearly, or is it like all over the place? If I have to focus more on how a person talks and kind of, extract their point, I'm not going to be able to multitask, right? Because so it depends on a lot of factors, but it is a skill that you get used to with practice also. Keep in mind, you're newer at this and like you might hate hearing that, and I apologize, but also it's real, and you're taking on a whole different level of cognitive load because of how you're shifting, and you really got to give yourself some grace and remember that. And it will happen. It will keep you've already seen it, I think, and all these other things, like your example about using VS Code, and so it does come with practice. But it's also not a thing that I can do every time either. I don't want to pretend otherwise. Right. There's plenty of time where, exactly like you described, it's not possible for me to do.
Yeah. One thing. Yeah. Again, I understand what you're saying, and I see that. Even just having my wife behind me now, when I try to do something on the computer screen, is making me frustrated. I have difficulties having someone watching me doing things, and this is not going away. This is there. I don't know why. I don't know what it is, but it's a fact. When I'm alone, I'm calm. I know. Okay, you know what? I will concentrate on my screen reader. But having someone else, wow, you have no idea how it triggers me, and it never done that before.
Well, I won't pretend to have the answer exactly that applies to you, but I would imagine that, something that's new and raw and feels uncomfortable, and, you're dealing with a loss, right? Forget about what you're able to do today using other methods and mechanisms. You're dealing with a loss, right? You're mourning the considerable loss of a primary sense that you've had, even if it's in a diminished form, that you've had for a really long time. And that is a real heavy thing. And so, that lives with you in the background, kind of sitting on your shoulder while you're also trying to do this new thing that you can half do on your computer. Right. And so I would imagine that having someone watch you, even though, this is your wife, and you love each other, and you're safe, and etc.
Yeah.
It's highly vulnerable, right? And there's all kinds of other things in life where, if I just move into a neighborhood and I'm kind of new to the neighbors, and they're a little bit curious, and like some of them know that I'm blind and some of them don't, and I'm going to go outside in my front yard and do something that I'm a little bit unfamiliar with. The task in and of itself, I don't know, I'm going to sink a mailbox post into the ground, and I'm not entirely, right. I've only done that in Florida where I grew up, not in the soil of Colorado. And I sort of feel self-conscious about, everybody's going to be watching me out their window, and I can't even look over and see that they're watching me, although sometimes you can feel it, in the back of your neck.
Yeah.
But so I think this is very real, and I think it's very understandable to feel this way.
Yeah, nice to hear. To be frank, I mean, I know that I have a long way to go from here, and to add some realism, I will now switch screen. We have a question. We have some questions from people, and I don't want to take too much of your time. So let me try to get some questions, and we will try to reply to them quickly. So John Sherwood is asking if new AI is helping with this.
I mean, it does for some things. So the biggest that comes to mind is around image recognition and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's always something that you have to be careful trusting, or the AI will focus on aspects of the image that might not be the thing that I care most about. And like all the disclaimers say, you shouldn't use it for things that could kill you, like crossing a street or, does this electrical wire in this box look hot, before or whatever. But it does certainly help for that. Whether it's just recognizing text, that's not necessarily AI, but recognizing text, or also just describing images. I don't feel like it's necessarily helpful beyond that. The image arena is a big arena, right? There's things that I don't have today that I've heard of other people really valuing, like various glasses that are integrated with AI, and they can describe a scene, or they can read text, or answer questions. And I think there's a lot of promise in that stuff, and I'm interested in that. I'm keeping my eye on it, but I don't think it's at a place yet where it would make my life super exciting. It feels cool and a little bit gimmicky, but still valuable in bits and pieces.
Yeah, I hear you on that. So another question from John is there any job that is fine or very hard that we have experienced so far?
Well, I think if a job is like fine or not fine, as somebody who happens to be blind, I think whether that's, ranks as surprising to me, it's probably going to be less surprising to me than it might be from the perspective of someone who's sighted and is, from a different vantage point. There's always more challenging elements of a job that also make the same job harder or easier depending on that element. So a great example is, like traveling or navigating a customer site. Let's say I'm a sales solution engineer and I have to go, see customers all the time on site. If I'm lucky, I can like travel with my AE or my other sales counterpart and kind of, literally walk with them, go sighted guide, like take their arm or their shoulder and kind of mitigate some of that. But for me especially, I've never been like a particularly adept like navigator as a blind person. I'm way too zoomed in on my sort of perspective, where I'm like learning how to get from one place to another, and it's as though if you imagine me seeing my surroundings in terms of how I recall, the sidewalk that I'm walking on and the pitch of the pavement changes and there's a curb here, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
I'm way too zoomed in to like what I'm observing, and that makes it hard to deal with changes in your travel. And so I can get around, but I never felt as good at it as some people. So if there's a job that I would really love that's like helping to sell product X and get it in the hands of customers, but there's travel, I can do the travel, but it's not worth it to me, right? Which a lot of people would also say that, even if they could see, depending on their preference. So yeah, and then going in the other direction, what jobs are surprisingly fine being visually impaired? No, I don't know. Again, I think that's more going to be in the perspective of someone else. Hopefully that makes sense. Essentially, it boils down to like, I know what I can do or what I'm probably capable of, and so I'm not surprised, but somebody else might be, because their perspective understandably is, you're missing this primary thing that I couldn't imagine missing. How can you possibly ... right? How can you possibly tie your shoes or shave your face, or how do you know when you're done shaving? like there's 100,000 questions that are understandable and are natural for people to have. And I've always been very open about these things, and I'm happy to have conversations about all that sort of stuff. And the one thing, sort of a side tangent, that this makes me think of is that, if you're respectfully curious about all these kinds of things, I would say always ask. Everyone's different. Some people don't like talking about their stuff, but always ask. It's healthy. I used to go speak to elementary schools and talk to kids and show them all the things and Braille and technology. And the questions they ask are great because they're not like censored at all, right? They would be like, how do you pee? How do you go to the bathroom? They're great. It's great to talk to kids about this stuff.
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, it's a good way to break ice as well. If you meet a blind person, I'd say, ask a couple of questions. For me, surprisingly, what is very difficult first of all, I have a huge hard time concentrating on someone that is speaking on a loud environment now. Well, it's always been like that. It's even worse these days. So when people started to realize that, I wasn't sure if they were talking to me or not. So just having someone touching my shoulder, saying, you know what, I'm talking to you now. Those things. It's very hard for sighted people to imagine what it is. I mean, the one of the worst for that scenario is like you're standing on the other side of a counter where you have to order food at the counter, and like the folks behind the counter are sort of multitasking and they're making eye contact with people for the most part and being like, hey man, what do you want? You don't really know if that is to you. There's been tons and tons of times where I've started saying, I'd like a blah or a blah, and literally, this isn't about me at all. Then it's like super embarrassing. But those things are tough to navigate. I agree. So again, from John, so is there anything that they can do to help? Generally speaking. So help in what way, or what? Or in fact, let me rephrase it. It's more like if there will be one accessibility thing that they can do, what could it be to help? It's a vague question. Yeah, let's focus that on tech and things like that. So how do you is there something that your team is doing that you brought up maybe because you had a challenge and things like that, and now they adopt that, or I don't know.
So I think I've got some good, I'll try to be quicker at some of these. I feel like all my answers are long because there's so much we could talk about here. So so apologies for that. If
we should do a version 2 at some point.
Yeah, sure. But so I'll throw a few things out there that I think kind of fit this category. It's sort of analogous to, talking about some challenges, but it connects back to folks being aware and able to sort of do relatively straightforward things to help. So I think it's a good fit. So, one thing that comes to mind is like architecture, design, network diagrams as an example. So a lot of people will understandably use these, or will have like an infographic that could be about their library or their package that they wrote in Go to like do a thing, or it could be like, here's how these components in a distributed system come together, whatever. But obviously those aren't accessible. Even trying to have AI describe some of those things, it's very subjective, right? So it's kind of like looking at a picture from a specific angle. And what I've heard from a lot of friends who are also technical professionals that are sighted is everybody thinks their diagrams are great and make tons of sense, and they often don't anyway. So it's not even like you're missing out. But my point about these various diagrams is that it's not the only way to convey the thing. And it takes you a lot of effort to put those diagrams together. And I know that it's your baby, maybe in some cases, but like you love it and it's, your labor of love, and that's okay. But have alternate descriptions. And I know it's going to be verbose. That's okay. It's hard to write technical documentation, but having other descriptions of how components come together will really be beneficial. And not just for people that are blind. There are people that are dyslexic. There are people who aren't visual learners. There's all these other categorical humans who can't slurp in a diagram mentally and understand your system. So that's one. Screen shares, we sort of mentioned earlier, somebody sharing their screen doesn't work. I find it very successful that thankfully most people also verbalize. So no offense to anyone's slides, but often you can get away without seeing the slides. But it is cool when you provide the slides in real time. Give me a link to your Google Slides doc or whatever. But I'm probably not going to read it in real time either, because like we talked about earlier, listening to the screen reader and listening to the person, usually there's valuable dialogue happening over top of the visuals. And that dialogue is not going to be here for me later. The slides are, so I'm going to mostly listen to the person. But also, if you can provide, if you're going to be doing a demo and you're going to show me how you do a bunch of stuff in Terraform or whatever, if you can just give me a repo to look at, or if you're going to demo an app or some online thing and there's like a demo environment that I can also get into, or a test environment that I can have access to, and this is, assuming it's maybe something within a company, right, that you work for, that goes a long way. Another one is like on-camera nods and thumbs up. Sometimes you might say, hey, I have this cool idea, we should do blah. What's everybody think? And then it's crickets. But it's only because they're enthusiastically nodding and giving double thumbs up and like clapping, but everybody's muted. And again, that awareness of people speaking up, even if it's like one person saying, you're getting tons of nods. Oh, thank you very much. Right, so that's another good example. Describing like memes or screenshots or whatnot in something like Slack, a workplace chat, is super helpful. These days, I can pump it into some kind of tool to get a description. But to be honest, it's not super, super automatic. It's getting better, but it's not worth it for me to, go grab the image and do a bunch of things and be like, oh, it's a meme about blah, blah, blah. Having humans describe it, quickly goes a long way. And it's kind of fun too, right? Like how so-and-so is going to describe this meme, is also going to be different than how somebody else describes it. And so it's also neat because you're getting a little bit of the perspective of the poster, which some people don't want, right? Some people, like, I'm going to hide behind this meme and let you interpret if I mean it in like an angry way or not. But it's really brings a group together for me to know all of the visual based things that you all are posting, because it's a common, even like emojis, right? Like if in Slack your emoji is named smile4, that doesn't really tell me, is it a smirky smile? When might I use this smile? Should I use it as like a friendly, like, sounds good, I appreciate you? Or should I use it as a like, I'm sick of your business?
Totally. Yeah, for me as well on Slack, it's all about when someone is posting a screenshot. Maybe there's some code there, maybe there, whatever that is. So I still need to save the file, open that into an image viewer, and use my screen reader. It detects text on an image, and now it's turning that into something that I can read now. It just takes time. So I mean,
so often in those scenarios, I will just unnecessarily apologize. Oh, I'm sorry, I happen to be completely blind and I can't see your screenshot. And I say that, by the way, because sometimes if I just say I can't see your screenshot, they are under the impression, it didn't upload right, or no, that's not what I mean. I mean, like, literally, I can't see it ever. And I will just request, would you mind just pasting the error message? I think providing this is my problem in screenshot form is a natural sort of muscle memory that humans have, which is understandable. Mm-hmm. And they're visual people and it's their primary sense, and everyone wants to sort of see what you're seeing. And sometimes people don't know what the relevant text to provide is. And so they're just like, here's my screen, you figure it out. It didn't work. That's all I know. And so sometimes you're walking them through, oh, well, does it say this or does it say that? Or would you mind pasting the error? Or and 99% of the time, everyone's willing and friendly. And also sometimes people forget. Like there's some people who, like, every other time I have to be like, like, they're a good friend of mine and they're pasting me screenshots all the time, and I'm just like, dude, come on. So it's fine. Totally. But I think asking for what you need can be uncomfortable and is hugely important. It's gonna really minimize that cognitive load. Just like these questions we've gotten, what can we do to help, et cetera, et cetera. I realize this doesn't represent 100% of the world, but I mean, by and large, people want to know. And the thing that I'll also say is that, like is true about humans everywhere, everyone's different. Every blind person is, not going to want the same thing. Just like two technology enthusiasts have different preferences and opinions, etc. There's no one size fits all. That's why, going back to that, ask, have conversations, be curious. It's fine. Is the most valuable, because someone else might say, oh, I never want to ask for the error message. I always want to interpret the screenshot because it makes me feel like I'm not different or whatever. And that might be important to that person. But to me, I'd rather save the time and get what I need. And it's not like hard for the other person to do that thing for the most part. So yeah, it's important to, I think, point out that, the one blind person who you may have encountered in the world is, of course, not like all others. It's not representative, and it's an important kind of funny thing that I find I have to say a lot of the time, because sometimes, like, people will come up to me and there's all these pre-assumptions, and it's based on, like, a blind character they saw in a movie. And I'm like, whoa, okay, well, now I need to undo those things in this conversation.
Totally. You know what, Ivan? I think we will stop there. But yeah, unfortunately, we cannot go into all of the questions. Maybe we can do a version 2, because I find it extremely interesting. I think there's a lot to unpack still. So at some point, if you have some times, maybe we can do a version 2 of that.
Sure, I'd love to. And I appreciate getting to chat with you. And you and I have never really talked like this. And I hope we've covered a lot of ground and a lot of sort of tangents. And I hope that most of it has been interesting to folks. You and I are having this conversation, and then a bunch of other people are listening. And so I've tried to sort of allow myself to go down some of these rabbit holes. And I hope
totally.
That's been,
that's why I think we have enough material to continue this conversation. I think.
Yeah.
So let's see how people react to this, and thank you very much for your time today.
Yeah, thank you. It's been great chatting with you.
All right, bye-bye. All right, that's it for this week. I would really appreciate if you can talk or share about this podcast. It's always helpful. Also, another way to support this show is by purchasing my course. There's always a link in the show notes. So on that, see you next week.